Okay, this is going to be just an extremely short history of photography, just a few bullet points of important moments, but mostly showing you some of the most famous photographers in history. And I'm sure I've missed tons of photographers that other people love, but I've just chosen some of the standouts that I think it would be really good for you to be familiar with. Photography is derived from the Greek phos, which means light, and grapho, which means to write. So the word photography literally means writing with light. And before we get to the history and the famous photographers, I do want to talk about the types of photography. So art photography, it's all about the artist and their vision. They're trying to communicate something that they have inside of them that they want to tell someone else. Documentary photography, it's all about the subject, the person being documented, or people. Commercial photography, all about the client. All right, it's all about what the person who is paying you to take this photo wants. And then photojournalism, it's all about the story, and it's all about communicating the story to a wider public to help them understand what's going on in the world. A few highlights in the history of photography. The camera obscura has been around forever. It's literally just forcing light through a hole, which then gets kind of projected onto a plane backwards and upside down. And I'm not going to go into a great detail, but you can look up a video of this to kind of see how it works, and you could make it yourself today if you so wished. The first photograph was taken by Nietzsche back in 1826. It was a really grainy photo. It took an extremely long exposure, but it is considered the first photograph. Daguerreotypes were invented in 1839 by someone named Louis Daguerre, and they were printed on metal and really kind of opened up photography to more than just, well, it still was a very specialized thing, but it opened up studios across the world, and people began getting things like family portraits. In 1841, the negative positive process was invented by Fox Talbot, which meant that you could produce more than one positive print from a single negative. Wet to dry plates were then invented between the 40s and 50s. In the 1850s, roaming studios became popular, meaning that you could get your photograph taken in a number of different places, whereas it used to be so clunky that you really couldn't move your camera equipment everywhere. 1886 was the first time we saw photographs in newspapers. Kodak was invented in 1888, and the Brownie camera by Kodak was invented in 1901. And this really was the first consumer-grade camera that lots of people owned to take pictures of things like their family. Color photography came along in 1906. In 1963, the Polaroid was invented, very popular for a while, and is kind of popular again. In 2004, Kodak stopped making film. Those are just obviously a few keystones to be familiar with. Let's talk about some famous photographers. The first person I want to talk about is Alfred Stieglitz. And many people believe that it's Stieglitz who really kind of made photography what it is today in terms of it being an art. Before Stieglitz came along, photography was just considered, I guess, a science. Like, you were taking a picture of reality and there was no art to it. But Stieglitz came along and said, yeah, this is something we can put in a gallery. This is something we can hang on a wall. We can make something beautiful with a camera. Because there was a lot of contention when photography was first invented about, painters or other forms of more traditional art and the time intensity that it took to create versus, the camera coming along where you just have to well, a little bit more than push a button, but you could really reproduce reality perfectly without a lot of effort. So his work with photography was revolutionary for how he portrayed still lifes and also what he brought to portraits. And it was really early on, so they're black and white, but his photographs are pretty distinguished looking. They have a sepia tone. This one is Winter, Fifth Avenue, 1893. Venetian Canal, 1894. And this is a portrait of his wife, Georgia O'Keeffe. Some of you might be familiar with Georgia O'Keeffe. Diane Arbus is an interesting photographer and has really interesting subjects. She tended to take photographs of what might be considered deviant or marginal people, or at least that's how she described these people at the time. Twins were also popular. Pretty distinguished, although she is similar to another photographer we'll talk about soon here. Henri Cartier-Bresson is a French photographer, and he would be considered the father of photojournalism. He's most famous for creating street photography, that certain style of photojournalism using a flash, actually. So candid photographs, real life reportage. He also formed the term the decisive moment. It's a term that is still very much used today in terms of photojournalism, where he really watches for just the right moment of maybe a coincidence or an action to take a picture. He also created the Magnum Photo Agency, which is a huge photo agency to this day. Here's a quote from him. "To me, photography is the simultaneous recognition in a fraction of a second of the significance of an event, as well as the precise organization of forms which give that event its proper expression." So let's take a look at some of his photos and you'll see how he caught decisive moments. I hope you'll look up some photographs yourself. I only select a few here, but there are so many good ones. Ansel Adams is definitely one of the most famous photographers of today. Even though he's not a contemporary, he's, even people who aren't big photography nerds or majors, most know who this guy is. He's well known as a master of the darkroom, and his black and white landscapes of Yosemite and the Grand Tetons are really great for captivating the contrast. And he achieved this with extensive dodging and burning in the darkroom, so kind of lightening and darkening certain areas. He takes pictures of vast, sweeping landscapes like this. He developed the zone system, something that helped determine the optimal exposure and the development time for a given photograph. You might learn about this if you take a photography class. And he introduced the idea of pre-visualization, which involves the photographer imagining what he wants this print to look like before it is even taken. His photography is also quite distinguished. You can pretty much see his photo and know that it's his. Brian Duffy, he's an English photographer, or was an English photographer, best known for his work in shooting fashion, mostly in the 1960s and 70s. Apparently he later lost interest in photography and even burned more than half of his portfolio and the negatives themselves in a fire. Some of them were saved, of course, and we can see them today. A year before he died, he actually began taking pictures again. But he takes pictures of a lot of rock and roll stars and many familiar faces. Twiggy, oops, sorry, that got cut off there. Definitely look up some of his photos if you will. Dorothea Lange, also a very well-known photographer. She was a photojournalist here in America, and she's best known for photos of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. The photo on the right here, Migrant Mother, is probably one of the most well-known pictures of all time. Aside from her well-known work documenting the Great Depression, she also photographed the internment camps in the 1940s, and her photographs were really commissioned to bring light to the poor conditions in the Midwest in the 1930s and 40s, and brought a lot of attention to the strife of Americans that not too many people knew about at the time. Really a clear style. Josef Karsh. So I'd say he's the Ansel Adams of portraits. He's quoted as saying, "Within every man and woman is a secret hidden, and as a photographer, it is my task to reveal it if I can. The revelation, if it comes at all, will come in a small fraction of a second, with an unconscious gesture, a gleam of the eye, a brief lifting of the mask that all humans wear to conceal their innermost selves from the world. In that fleeting interval of opportunity, the photographer must act or lose his prize. Many photographers claim to capture such moments, but oh, that's the end of the quote. I'm sorry. Yes, so many photographers say that they capture these moments, but Karsh really had a gift for taking portraits that communicate something about the person. He usually has hands in his photographs, in his portraits of people, and you kind of feel like you really understand the person. Really famous one of Einstein. And there are, of course, many, many more. Robert Capa is probably best known for war photography. He worked to cover 5 different wars, actually, including World War II. And he was also a founding member of the Magnum Photo Agency with Cartier-Bresson. Here is one of his more famous images as well. I don't know why my pictures got scrambled all of a sudden here, guys. I'm sorry about that. Capa was known to say, if your pictures are not good enough, then you aren't close enough. And I think that's really true. Getting close is half the battle. He actually died by stepping on a mine during the First Indochina War. And this famous photograph that you're looking at here, it was taken during the Spanish Civil War, and there's a lot of questions about whether it was staged or not. It's called The Falling Soldier. Mary Ellen Mark. Similar to Diane Arbus, really famous for photographs of the circus, though. She also does some twins. And some of her pictures are, I don't know, kind of creepy. And controversial. But really compelling. Yeah, creepy. And I couldn't not include Annie Liebovitz. She's still taking photographs today, really famous, mostly for portraits. Took tons and still takes photos for Rolling Stone, also Vanity Fair, and a number of other publications. This photo of John Lennon with Yoko Ono is probably your most famous. And if I'm correct, this was taken the same day that John Lennon was murdered. Now I'm kind of wanting to check that fact, but I do believe that I've heard that. She takes what she calls, let's see, yes, environmental portraits. Wanted to make sure I got that right. Which is people kind of doing what they do, taking pictures of people in their environment as they are. All right, so that's all I have. Again, there's so many other famous photographers out there. I encourage you to look at more photos of this particular group, but also to find some of your own that you really love. And that might be part of something that we do as a discussion post. So thank you very much.